What happens when a young woman, desperate for justice, puts her trust in the only witness to her mother's murder, her dog? No one in the courtroom expected a simple sniff to expose the powerful man everyone believed was untouchable. What happened next left the judge absolutely speechless. Luna Henderson sat stiffly on the hard courtroom bench, her fingers wrapped around Bandit's leash like it was the only thing keeping her together. The air was thick, stale, like the whole place had already decided this was over before it even began. In front of the judge lay the case file. Janet Henderson, deceased. Case closed. Closed too fast. The court finds the defendant. Luna shot up. No! Her voice cut through the room. You didn't even investigate properly. Gasps, murmurs. The judge glared at her over his glasses, his gavel hitting the desk. Miss Henderson what? She snapped. Sit quietly while you ruin someone's life to cover your mess. Her eyes locked onto him. Michael Walsh. Tall, sharp suit, smug, the kind of man who always wins because he plays by rules he helped write. Miss Henderson, he said smoothly, I understand this is difficult, but the evidence is clear. Luna's stomach twisted. Is it? She asked. Or is it just convenient? Walsh's smirk flickered. Bandit shifted, ears perked. He had seen the killer that night, and he never forgot a scent. Luna reached into her bag, pulling out her mother's handkerchief. She knelt, pressing it to Bandit's nose. Then, low enough that only he could hear. Find. The shift Bandit's body went rigid. His nose twitched. Then, he moved, weaving between benches, sniffing the air. Focused. Silent. Until he stopped, right in front of Walsh. The prosecutor's smirk vanished. Bandit growled, low, deep, dangerous. Walsh flinched. The courtroom erupted. Remove the dog, the judge barked. Bandit didn't move. Walsh grabbed his papers. His hands shook. Your Honor, I request a recess. Silence. A long, loaded silence. Then finally, motion granted. The aftermath. Walsh practically bolted from the room. Luna just watched him go, her heart pounding, because Bandit had found something, and whatever it was, Walsh knew it. Luna barely had time to breathe before the officers grabbed her arms and dragged her out of the courtroom. The second she was outside, the pressure on her wrists tightened. Too tight. She looked up and met the smug, pale face of Detective Hayward. Tall, broad, with that same condescending smirk she'd seen 1,000 times before on men like him. That was a real dumb move, girl, he said, shaking his head like she was some clueless kid. What, you think your dog's some kind of detective? Luna's pulse was thudding in her ears, but she didn't flinch. He smells fear, she said, steady and low. And you? You stink of it. Hayward's smirk slipped, just for a second. Luna filed that away for later, because right now, she had bigger things to handle. She knew it. Walsh was guilty. The way he panicked in that courtroom, the way Bandit reacted. He wasn't just nervous, he was exposed, but knowing wasn't enough. She needed proof. Fast. The break-in. That night, Luna moved. She kept her hood low, her steps quiet as she slipped through the back entrance of the courthouse. The place was dark, still, except for the low hum of security cameras and the faint shuffle of a janitor somewhere on the lower floors. Bandit moved beside her, silent, alert. He knew this wasn't a game. Luna's heart hammered as she crept up the stairs. Second floor, the prosecutor's office. She turned the corner and froze. The light was on inside Walsh's office. He was there. The conversation she wasn't meant to hear. Luna pressed herself against the wall, barely breathing. Through the crack in the door, she could hear voices. Walsh. And someone else. She's a problem, Walsh was saying, his voice sharp, clipped. She's getting too close. A pause. Then a second voice, low, rough, dangerous. Relax, the man said. She won't be a problem much longer. Luna's blood ran cold. They weren't just trying to silence her. They were going to get rid of her. She took a slow, careful step back, and the door flew open. Walsh's furious eyes locked onto her. You, he started, his voice snarling. But Bandit moved first. The fight for proof. A snarl, a flash of teeth. Walsh stumbled back, cursing, as Bandit lunged between them, his growl rumbling through the office. Luna didn't waste a second. She rushed to the desk, eyes scanning the computer screen. And there it was, a video file. Camera_murder. Her stomach flipped. She grabbed the flash drive off the desk, shoved it into the USB port, and watched as the file began to transfer. Seconds stretched like hours. Behind her, Walsh was scrambling, shouting into his phone, "Get up here, now!" Luna's hands shook as the loading bar crept forward. 80%. Come on, 90%. Almost there. Stop her. 100%. Luna snatched the drive out and turned just as Walsh lunged at her. But Bandit was faster. The dog barreled into him, sending him crashing into the desk. Papers and pens scattered to the floor. Luna didn't look back. She ran. The escape. She heard the security alarm blare as she bolted down the hall. Behind her, footsteps, shouting. She pushed harder, her lungs burning as she flew down the stairwell, Bandit right at her side. 1 floor down. 2, almost there. Then, a guard appeared at the exit. "Hey, stop!" Luna didn't stop. She dropped low, slid under his arm, and hit the door at full force. Cold night air slammed into her. She was out. But it wasn't over. She had the proof. Now she had to make it to court alive. Luna stood outside the courthouse, staring up at the massive gray building that had never felt like a place for justice. It had always been a place where people like her, young, black, unheard, were ignored, dismissed, forgotten. But not today. Today, she was walking in with the truth. The weight of the flash drive in her pocket felt like a loaded gun. The evidence was undeniable. But she knew one thing for sure. Powerful men don't go down without a fight. Taking a deep breath, she gripped Bandit's leash and stepped inside. The final battle. The courtroom was packed. The energy in the air, thick, heavy, like everybody could feel what was about to go down. At the front of the room, Michael Walsh sat stiff at his table, trying and failing to look relaxed. His usual arrogance was cracking. His fingers tapped against the desk, his jaw clenched. Good, he should be nervous. The judge, an older black man with tired eyes but sharp instincts, adjusted his glasses inside. "Miss Henderson," he said, "you claim to have new evidence in this case?" Luna held her ground. "Yes, Your Honor," she said, voice clear. "This flash drive contains security footage from the night my mother was killed." The reaction was instant. Reporters leaned forward. People in the gallery whispered. And Walsh? He looked like he'd swallowed a bucket of ice. "Objection," he blurted, standing so fast his chair scraped against the floor. "This so-called evidence is completely—" "Sit down, Mr. Walsh," the judge said, unimpressed. Walsh's mouth snapped shut. He hesitated, then slowly lowered himself back into his seat. Luna stepped forward and handed the flash drive to the bailiff. The judge inserted it into the laptop. And then, the courtroom went silent. The video. The screen flickered. A grainy security feed. A dark alley. Luna's breath hitched. She knew this moment. She'd played it over and over in her head, but seeing it, really seeing it, made her stomach twist. On screen, her mother, Janet Henderson, stood in the alley near the back of their apartment complex. Then, a figure appeared. Tall, dark coat, purposeful steps. The man stopped right in front of her. Luna clenched her fists. Michael Walsh. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge leaned forward. The video continued. Her mother shook her head, arguing with him. Then, he reached into his coat, pulled out a gun, and fired. The gunshot wasn't heard, but the moment Janet collapsed to the ground, clutching her stomach, the reality of it hit like a freight train. The courtroom erupted. People shouted. Reporters scrambled for their phones. Luna felt her knees go weak, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. She already knew what had happened, but seeing it, undeniable proof, it was like being hit all over again. Bandit pressed against her leg, sensing her tension. She needed him there. The fall of Michael Walsh. This is fake," Walsh yelled, scrambling to his feet. His face was red, sweat beating at his temple. "It's been tampered with." Nobody believed him, not with that look of pure panic on his face. The judge leaned back, his expression unreadable, but his next words sealed it. "Bailiff," he said, "take him into custody." Walsh froze. Then, like a man drowning, he lunged toward the door, too slow. Two officers grabbed him, yanking his arms behind his back. "Wait, this is a setup," he screamed, thrashing like a caged animal. "I'm innocent, The officers shoved him forward. The gavel slammed down. "Court is adjourned," the judge said, his voice firm. It was over. Justice served. Luna stood there, completely still. For the first time since her mother's murder, her chest didn't feel so tight. Her eyes burned, but she refused to cry. Not here. She glanced down at Bandit, running her hand over his fur. He looked up at her, tail wagging just slightly. "We did it, boy," she whispered. She lifted her chin, taking it all in. Walsh dragged away in cuffs. The reporters rushing to break the story. The people in the crowd whispering her name. Her mother didn't get to walk out of this courthouse. But Luna did. And for the first time, she felt free,